Hello boys and girls, Ita here. Welcome to this tutorial. Today I wanted to show you a little bit about the autopilot system in the Embraer E-Jets E170, 175, 190, 195. It's really all the same in that aspect. It's going to be the very bare minimum of how to use the autopilot and the auto flight control system, AFCS. Just the basics. I'm not going to dive too deep. No abnormals, nothing too unique. Just the very basics we use most flights. And for that, I'm going to use a short flight from New York JFK to Boston Logan Airport. I'm not going to focus on any other procedures other than simply the autopilot stuff. So I will cover the guidance panel, the flight mode annunciations or FMA. Then we move into the takeoff profile and modes in use there, some modes to use in flight, and then finish with a standard ILS landing in Boston. It's going to be the ILS 4 right in Boston if anyone is interested. It will be based on the Feelthere Embraer E175 version 3 and Prepare 3D version 4. That add-on simulates the Epic Load 25. Epic Load 27, which you can find in the newer, at this time of the video was filmed, the Flight Sim Studio Embraer E175 for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Most functions are going to be very similar, if not 100% accurate. There's some very minor differences. If I'm going to run into where there is a difference, I'll try to remember to point out. But they're very, very similar. Usual disclaimer, this is loosely based on the company I fly for, and with the system configuration we have installed for general enrichment and for home flight simmers, basically, just to have an idea. If you're a real Embraer pilot, be my guest, but always refer to your official company manuals and training, and don't take what I said for granted. Just verify, but if it helps you visualize things, as I said, be my guest. If you have any questions or comments afterwards, I'd be happy to hear and interact with you guys. Otherwise, let's just begin. The automatic flight control system, AFCS, is controlled by the guidance panel. You might know this panel from other systems, from other airplanes, excuse me, as the MCP mode control panel. We call it the guidance panel. Okay, and it's divided into a few areas. This area and this area control the PFD controls. I'm not going to cover them too much, but the essentials is, maybe I'll just take you really quickly. The VL takes us from basically FMS to VOR or localizer. So if I hit it again, it's going to be taken from localizer 1 to localizer 2. Maybe. I guess not in this add-on. If I hit FMS, it would take me back to FMS. If I hit FMS again, it should take me to FMS 2, and then it would display in yellow. Weather connects to... I'm not even going to show you this. HSI, the same. Preview is going to be interesting. I'm going to show you later. And FPR is the flight path reference. And that would just give me a reference over here, which I can toggle with the FPA selector. And it's just a nice reference. You can see it doesn't do anything to the autopilot. It just gives the reference. If I want to see what's, for example, 4 degrees nose up, that's where it is. So I can review this. Now I can get rid of it. This reference also shows when I use FPA, but we're going to get to that. So this is in a nutshell, what we use that for. Preview, just to give you a quick idea, basically when we're using FMS, so magenta instruments, we can preview in cyan or blue, we can preview the instruments, the course, that's tuned into nav1, the course, and the basically the localizer. But so we're still navigating based on the magenta, but we're previewing it, the overlay. Okay, but for now we're going to get rid of it, so it's not going to show. Not going to be shown. As for the guidance panel itself, so we have flight directors for both sides. Right now the flight director is off. We can see that in the FMA. We're going to get to the FMA in a bit. Then we have here the lateral mode. This is the vertical mode. And this is the general autopilot, yaw damper, and source. The source selector chooses whose flight instruments are in command of the autopilot. So this is the first officer in command. This is the captain in command. You can see over here as we're toggling the arrow. Yeah. So I want to be flying the captain. So it's going to point to the left side. So the left system is in command of the autopilot. The autopilot, we have one autopilot and it has two channels. We don't need to worry about the channels. The channels are automatically selected based on what flight, what day it is, stuff like that. So it's automatically selected. The yaw damper should be activated automatically once we pressurize hydraulic systems 1 and 3, or 1 or 3 to be honest. But if it's not, it would show like this. I could just toggle it on and it's fine. There's no difference in it. Let's see. The heading, nav, approach, banks, pretty self-explanatory. The only kind of interesting one here is bank. Bank pretty much limits my bank angle to only 15, and it's useful especially in engine failure situations, but also in higher altitude operations. Nav would keep whatever nav source we have. Heading simply maintains the heading, and approach mode is approach mode. As for these, we're gonna take a look at them a little bit further. But these are all so apart from the auto throttle system, these are all the vertical mode controls. Speed has an FMS selector, which is what we would choose to begin with. And then after we've set all the V speeds, it would default to V2. Or we can simply switch it to manual, where it would show cyan, and then we would control it manually. Okay, but for departure, we would set it to FMS and let it default to 144. Altitude selector, pretty self-explanatory, and as you can see, it's controlled over here. Alrighty, cool. So now let's talk briefly about the takeoff profile, and after we've covered this, we can actually, before the takeoff profile, let me talk about this real quick. This is the PFD, the primary flight display, and within it we have the flight mode annunciator. This is basically the only place I'm looking to see what mode is engaged. Okay, we have the what kind of speed control do we have, whether it's speed on thrust or speed on elevator. I'll cover that in a bit. This is where the autopilot, whether it's on, it's going to be here, the auto throttle. And then we have the roll mode or the lateral mode, and then we have the vertical mode. We have the armed, which would be in white, and then we have the engaged modes. And general rule of thumb, if it's magenta, it is FMS mode, and if it's green, it is a manual or non-FMS mode. So we will cover these in just a bit, but the point is, don't look at here. You won't see altitudes, you won't see speeds here, and in fact all of these lights behind the buttons are actually deactivated, so we only refer to the FMA to see what mode is engaged. Out of JFK here, we're just going to maintain a runway heading up to 5,000, and I'm going to talk briefly about the profile. So to begin with, once everything is set up, and everything is already set up, as I said, I'm not going to focus on anything apart from flying the guidance panel. I need to just press toga. Now, this is a difference from other airplanes. I know it's kind of weird to press toga when we're not ready for departure yet, but nevertheless I'm going to press it. Notice that it's not going to activate anything in the auto throttle system. It's just going to activate the lateral and the vertical modes for takeoff. And then we have the flight director as it's shown just for takeoff. This is the only time it's shown in crosshair like that. After takeoff, it would show us for the reference for the flight path vector. So you will see that in a bit. But for now, it is the crosshairs. It defaults to, it goes to the degrees pitch up we would need after takeoff, and that is calculated after we have all the performance information in. Then we have roll mode. What does roll mode do? Roll mode makes sure that we are, if the wings are less than 6 degrees of bank, it would just command wings level. If it's between 6 degrees and 35 degrees, it would just maintain whatever bank we have, and above 35 degrees of bank, it would just shallow the bank to 35 degrees, which is very steep bank, to be honest, but it would maintain that. This is the default mode, so whenever any roll mode is activated all of a sudden, then it would default to roll mode. So if we don't pay attention and we kind of press heading twice, for example, it would default to roll mode. We don't use it intentionally, at least in my operation. It's when you go to this, it's by mistake usually, but it's worth knowing what is it for. Takeoff mode is exactly what it is. It's just the initial climb. The takeoff mode just basically just maintains the speed, but it's not precisely flight level change, because the target is not necessarily the speed. The target is more like the commanded pitch angle. So how does the takeoff profile happen? Basically, when we are about to take off, we would hit auto throttle. Now the auto throttle is going to be armed, not engaged. This is probably a mistake, but only takeoff would be armed here. Once we advance the throttle, we would advance them to 40% and 1. Let it stabilize. Let both engines stabilize. See that they advance together and all the indications are good. And then we would advance the throttle all the way. We don't actually need to take it all the way, because once we cross 50 degrees thrust lever angle, TLA, the auto throttle takes over, and then it would advance the rest of the way, all the way to the toga detent. Okay, I'm not going to talk about the max today, which refers to takeoff reserves, thrust, and everything like that. Toga would just take us to the current reference that we have for takeoff, which is, in our case, flex takeoff 1 to 42 degrees. So takeoff will activate. At 60 knots, it would go to hold mode, which basically stops commanding anything actively, but just maintains whatever we have set. And after liftoff, it goes back to takeoff mode. Obviously, at positive rate, gear up, etc. At 400 feet, we would command the roll mode, the lateral mode. Now, one thing I failed to mention here, in Epic Load 27, when we hit toga, to begin with, remember when we did it a few minutes ago, we would see roll and takeoff here, but we would also see LNAV and VNAV armed in here. LNAV would engage as soon as we're in the air, and VNAV would engage according to criteria we put into the FMS Perfinite pages. So we're in Epic Load 25, so it's not the case. Either way, we can always, if we don't, for example, in our case, in this takeoff, it's going to be a heading select after takeoff. We don't want the LNAV to engage, so all we can do is we just press nav and it disengages the LNAV if it is engaged for some reason, or if it's armed, excuse me, for some reason. So, as I said, we're airborne now. We would press at 400 feet above field elevation, we would activate the lateral mode. In our case, it's going to be heading select, and as the name says, it would just maintain the heading that is selected. If we have a turn immediately after takeoff, we could pre-select it to a certain heading, for example 110, and we would turn it. Why can we do that and not just keep it on runway heading always at all times for a case of an engine failure? Well, because if we just press the middle here, let's say it was set up to something else, like 060. Let's say we do takeoff and we have an engine failure. We just hit sync, push to sync, and it goes to the center. Okay, so 400 feet lateral mode. At 1,000 feet above a field elevation, we would activate the vertical mode. So it could be either flight level change to 10 in our case, or it would be VNAV. In our case today, it's going to be VNAV, and I'm going to talk about what VNAV is going to do. And basically, takeoff mode remains active until you deactivate it by either activating another mode, or if we activate the autopilot, that would take off takeoff mode. But then what would it revert to? So we said roll mode is the default for the lateral mode. The default mode for vertical mode is going to be flight path angle, FPA, which would maintain whatever path angle that we have at the moment of engagement. Okay, so once again, 40% stabilize, advance the throttle more, let it engage, take us to the air, positive rate gear up, 400 feet lateral mode, 1,000 feet vertical mode, and after we've engaged the vertical mode, we can engage the autopilot if we want to. And from that moment on, we would go to Merritt and begin the start to Boston. And on the way, I will try to play with some modes and show you what they do. Okay. I think we've covered all the bases. I sure hope so. Now pay no attention to my flying. I did not do any testing to see that I can actually control this thing. This add-on doesn't have the best flight characteristics in my opinion, but nevertheless, let's do it. One thing to note here, when I will engage VNAV, it's going to show flight level change. So I'm going to press VNAV, we will see flight level change, but flight level change in magenta, which means VNAV is engaged in flight level change mode, but this flight level change is going to be magenta, so it's going to do, it's going to act according to the VNAV logic, but nevertheless it's going to be a flight level change mode, so it would maintain the thrust, the climb thrust here, and it would pitch to maintain the speed. Okay, the difference between magenta flight level change, which is VNAV, to green flight level change is that green flight level change does not adhere to any altitude constraints that we have inputted using VNAV. Okay, the magenta flight level change, if there's an altitude constraint, it would stop climb and go into magenta alt mode until it can climb again. Okay, as for the speed schedule, the VNAV maintains V2 until we've engaged VNAV, and then the speed goes to the per finite departure arrival speed limit, so 210 until passing 3,000 or 6 miles. After that, it wants to go to 270 for the climb, but no, wait, we have another restraint, 250 below 10,000. After 10,000, it will eventually be released to go to 270. Okay, I think I covered quite a lot by now, so let's just take it to the air. Here's 40% ish. And here we go. Auto throttle kicked in. Toga. And basically we verify that the ATX is on and the takeoff is in and all the indications are good. Toga set. Here's hold mode. 80 knots checked. V1. Rotate. Positive rate, gear up. And as you can see, I'm just pitching to meet the flight director for departure. Here we go, 400 feet heading mode. And at 1000 VNAV and autopilot on. And as you can see, we've commanded 210 and we're climbing to 5000 on heading mode. I think it's time to clear ourselves to 16,000, which is our cruising altitude today. After we've crossed the F-bug, flaps 1, and another F-bug, flaps up. It's worth noting that 210 is a convenient speed because it is below 215, which is the maximum speed with flaps 2. So if you forget to do anything, we've taken off with flaps 2. So if we forget to do anything at all, 210 would keep us safe from exceeding the speed limit for flaps 2. Flaps 1 limit is already 230, and after that's up completely, and as we can see, we have flaps completely up now. We can accelerate past 230 and reach 250. And as we said, we're above 3000. The speed jumped from 210 to 250, and we're in flight level change. And as we can see, SPDE, that's speed on elevator, as in the thrust is maintained at the thrust limit. So right now we're at the limit for climb 1. You can see it's exactly at the defined limit. And then the speed is maintained by pitching until the required speed is actually maintained. Okay, I think it's time to go to merit. I can, of course, on heading mode, I can change the heading and it would follow. But for our case, I just want to go direct merit, so I'm going to do that now. And we can see that merit is all the way over there. It looks good to me, so I'm going to activate and press nav. As you can see, LNAV in magenta has captured, and now it will maintain this course to merit. Let's do another direct just to make it a little bit smoother. Direct to activate, and here we go. And I would sync the heading. Okay, we're flying nicely, climbing like a rocket, to be honest. And we are climbing through 10,000, which means we are once again losing another restriction. So the automatic speed would jump from 250 to 270. There we go, 10,000. Oh, 240, that's not correct. So what can I do? Just go to manual speed and take it to 270. It's worth noting that there's no real connection between which mode the flight level changes, whether it's on VNAV, so magenta flight level change, or if I take VNAV off, see it reverts to flight path angle and the speed is now on thrust. And now to green flight level change, so flight level change and speed on elevator once again. Even in speed on elevator, I can go back to FMS speeds and it would command the speed that would be commanded via the FMS. So these are unrelated. I can let the FMS control the speed and still be on green flight level change, or vice versa for VNAV flight level change, but manual speed. Now, let's say I want to shallow the climb. I can obviously go to vertical speed, which is another speed on thrust mode. Okay, so I went to vertical speed. I've controlled using the wheel here, and I'm looking over here at the FMA to see what vertical speed I'm commanding. And now once again I'm in a green mode, but still the speed is managed by the FMS. When is it going to jump up again? When I reach cruise level. And then we go from climb mode to cruise mode, and then it's going to jump from 270 to 290. Okay, vertical speed is one of the speed on thrust modes. I can also use flight path angle, and as you can see we have the 2.5 nose up, and I can take it up even further if I want to, but we're on flight path angle, speed on thrusts, and of course I can manage the speed myself to go to 290 for example. And then if I want to make it happen, I might want to lower my climb angle. Okay, so these are pretty much all the modes. Oh, another thing. Let's say they say, hey Delta, stop climb now. I can hit alt mode, and then regardless of what we have set, the airplane would just straight up level off and even come down. It should not just level off, it should slightly even descend to the altitude in which I hit alt mode. So it was like 15,200, so it should come down to that same altitude where I hit it. So let's say they say, okay, clear of conflict, let's go back to 16,000. Now we can see that 15.4 and 16,000 are very close together. If I hit flight level change, it would want to go to full throttle, right? So wrong. It's a bit of a smarter airplane than that. So theoretically, I don't know if it works in this model, but it doesn't. If it's that low of a difference, it doesn't take the throttle all the way to the limit. It would take it to an intermediate place. So this add-on is kind of stupid. So it does take it all the way to the end, and it's going to shoot like a rocket. So I don't want that. So I'll just maintain a nice, convenient 1,000 foot climb per minute to get to 16,000 feet. As you can see, ASEL is armed. It's honestly not really shown this way in the real airplane, but it just activates as we are. There it is. So we won't see it armed, but we will see that it's activated. It's in speed on thrust mode, which basically allows for the airplane to level off and capture an altitude. Whenever we capture an altitude, whether it's in magenta or in green, we would just go to ACEL, or altitude selection. Okay, these are the modes for the climb. Now let's say we have a descent. So I will talk about VNAV in just a minute, but let's say we want to, I just want to let it go to alt mode to essentially finish the car. Because let's say if I disturb it now, it would say, hey, I don't know what to do, and it would go to flight path angle, which I don't want. So now it's in alt mode. Okay, let's say I deactivate alt mode, so I press alt again. What does it go to? Flat path angle, of course. I hit alt again, and it goes to alt. Let's say I want to mess with it, and we're in LNAV. I want to hit nav again. What would it revert to? Of course, roll mode. But we don't want that, right? We want it on LNAV. Very, very cool. So let's say ATC says, hey, Delta, descend and maintain 14,000 feet. So 14,000 is set. Now I have a few options. I can either do vertical speed. Well, we can see, first of all, let's start with this. VNAV thinks we're in cruise. Okay? So we can see the vertical display here. VNAV knows we're in cruise, and therefore our speed should be 290 commanded by the FMS. Yes, it is. Once I start a descent, it would go to the descent speed here. Once it levels off, it would go back to cruise speed. That's why as a technique, I match these two to always match, so it doesn't go back and forth between the speeds, so it's roughly maintaining what it should. Now let's say I want to descend to 14,000. VNAV does not recommend us to descend yet, so I would probably have to descend in green. I would not talk right now about descend now function. Maybe, let's see. Is it available in this add-on? No, I don't want to do that yet. Okay, we'll talk about it later when we get close to top of descent. So, if you want to descend, we have, of course, the speed on thrust, and we can do the vertical speed, which is pretty much self-explanatory, just now on the way down. Of course, we can convert it. Let's let it settle a little bit. We can always convert it to flight path angle. Okay, so that's self-explanatory, maintaining minus 1.4. So whenever you pressed it, it would just select it as the current path angle, and we're descending on the flight path angle. And of course, we can always hit flight level change. On the descent, it would take us to flight level change. Of course, SPDE. Now it would lower the thrust all the way to idle, but it will maintain the speed using the elevator, so it would pitch down to help us maintain the speed. And of course, it's going to be quite a descent. Now I don't want it, so I'm going to just hit vertical speed and shallow it out just a little bit. 1000 to go, and now it's a speed on thrust again, right? You can see all this time autopilot and auto throttle have been connected. Okay, we're getting kind of close to Boston. Honestly, in the real airplane, once you've descended, not climbed, but once you've descended, the VNAV would understand that you've already initiated a descent. Either way, if you want to help the VNAV out a little bit, you can go to Perfinit page 3, and you could just tell it, hey, guess what, we have a new cruising altitude, and we have to update the cruising altitude as we go, especially if we climb. If we're just descending, it's not going to matter. Now, we've talked about the green modes for descending. Okay, now let's talk about VNAV descent. VNAV descent in this airplane is kind of special. So we do have some speed constraints. The primary one to always remember is the 10,000 feet. The 10,000 feet at 50 knots, at 250 knots. Oh, come on. Please heading select sync it. Okay, he doesn't want to sync, it's okay. I'm on LNAV anyway. So, 250 knots below 10,000, that's a main one. Now, the VNAV would plan whatever descent angle is programmed. By default, it's 3 degrees descent angle. It would not plan a level of segment to make sure we're complying with any speed. So if you don't pay attention and plan in advance your deceleration, the autopilot may or may not attempt or drop the speed here to, let's say, 250. But even if it does, there's no guarantee that it's actually going to make it. Okay, so it's going to be a little bit up to us to maintain, because VNAV is going to be on path mode, vertical path, and vertical path is just saying, hey, there's a path here. We calculated your path. It's going to be according to 3 degrees descent, and this is what we're going to maintain anyway. So it's worth noting. Oh, there's a erroneous altitude constraint here on Banky. I'm going to delete it because I want to have a nice clear descent from 14,000. So I'm going to activate that. Let's go to VNAV mode. So now we can see we're in VNAV altitude. In the real airplane, it doesn't say V alt, it just says alt, but it would be alt in magenta. So you can see that the top of descent is just before Roebuck. This is when the FMS planned for us to start our descent towards Boston, while maintaining the entire approach is already loaded in. I'm not going to brief it as a normal approach. I'm just going to quickly set it up. As you can see, everything is turning on right now. We have some constraints on the approach, and eventually we're going into ILS runway 04 right. Okay, so everything is set up over there. So basically, according to meeting those constraints, the VNAV would just plan a 3-degree descent as much as it can to maintain this descent path. If between two constraints it cannot maintain a 3-degree, then it will just plan whatever degree would be within that. There's some more advanced functions about it. I'm not going to talk about them, but essentially, let's say we're clear for the star and clear for the approach. We can simply make sure we are in magenta alt here, and then drop the altitude all the way to, let's say, the final approach speed altitude. So that's 1700 feet at Milt. Great, we can just set it up and then wait for it to start descending on its own. And all we have to do is wait. But just remember, it will not shallow the bank to meet the 10,000 feet, 250 knots restriction. We would have to make sure that it does it on its own. Now it looks like for top of descent, let's see, we have about 6 minutes until top of descent. Let's see that we're according to the correct barrel. Let's see if we're tuned for auto-tune. Yes, seems like we are. I don't know if it's actually going to work correctly, but so right now we're auto-tuning, so the VRs are automatically tuned according to certain, according to just looking for the best nav radio to help with the navigation sources. Once we get closer, we would go from en route mode to terminal mode, which we would see here. Once the FMS goes to terminal mode, it would automatically tune the approach frequency and the approach course. So all that would be left for us would be to just hit preview, and then we would have everything turned on for us. That typically happens for load 25, epic load 25. This whole process of auto-tuning happens about 30 miles away from the airport, from the landing airport. If it's load 27, that process is happening about 130 miles, if I'm not mistaken, from the airport. So a lot shorter, and typically in a perfect distance for top of descent and approach briefing. So that's just something to note about terminal mode. Once we get a little bit closer, as soon as I see terminal mode, I will just hit preview, and then we would have still FMS1 controlling the LNAV, but we would be able to overlay the localizer and later the glide slope when we can receive it. We can just overlay them in preview. Once we get really close and we are sure that we want to disregard LNAV and VNAV and just capture the ILS, we would just hit approach mode. And then as soon as it captures the localizer, so loc and glide slope would be armed here below whatever mode was activated. But then once it captures, it would go to, from FMS, it would go to green needles, so it would go to VR or localizer and just capture the localizer, and when it can, it would also capture the glide slope. We typically do that when we're between the intermediate fix and the final approach fix on the approach, because then we don't really have any more constraints to meet in the approach itself. So all that's left to do is, the next restriction is to just capture the glide slope and make sure we're crossing the final approach fix at the final approach fix altitude. Kind of makes sense, kind of self-explanatory, but I try. We're getting close to top of descent here. I've been talking quite a lot. I will not brief the approach. I don't care about this right now. You can see that I don't care about really anything in the airplane right now. I'm just telling you guys about how to manage the automation in this particular flight. Okay, so bear with me. So I've shown you vertical speed. I've shown you FPA. We are set up. We lowered the selected altitude to 1,700, so all the way to final approach fixed altitude. Of course, that's a little bit unrealistic according to ATC, but for our sake, I just want to show you how the VNAV can manage things. So we are in alt mode, but it's magenta alt, so which means as soon as it captures the path, it would do just that. It would capture the path and start descending. Normally when this close to top of descent, we would also have descend now prompt, but it's not simulated here. Basically, it's starting at this shallow descent at 1,000 feet per minute until it intercepts with the planned path. Okay, almost getting to rollback here. I'm disregarding anything on the star on the approach. I'm completely not doing it. You know what? I can do rollback speed to 60, and if there's a constraint like that, then it should ideally do it. So 290, let's see if it goes to rollback at 260 knots. And I put us kind of on purpose in kind of a special situation. We're starting our descent first, and then we have to slow down to rollback at 260 knots. I'm not going to touch anything. Let's just see how it does. Usually the airplane does not handle it too well because it starts a descent at 3 degrees. It would typically it would keep the descent speed, whatever speed we are, it would typically maintain it. Oh, nice. So it is commanding the speed to 260 to descend, and soon we're also starting our descent according to top of descent. Let's see if it does that. Here we go. We have the path over here, and there we go, vertical path. And like I said, the ASCL armed is not really a thing, but it is what it is. So what is our next limit? Of course, 250 below 10,000. As I told you, it's speed on thrust, so it would just try as best as it can to maintain whatever speed is commanded here using the thrust. Now we're already at idle, so it's actually pretty realistic that we're trying to descend and it's just simply too slow for it to maintain. So now we're descending, and it looks like it can actually do it for now. Now I'm just waiting for 10,000 feet. Let's see. When does it decide to try and meet the restriction of 250 below 10,000 feet? Here we go, even 240. Okay, we'll take it. Why is that? I honestly don't know. I think it's something with the add-on. It would not go to 240 just like that. It would go to whatever limitation is set on Perfinite. Page 3 out of 3. In Epic Load 27, it's a different page. I can't remember off the top of my head. If I see it, I can remember it. But as you can see, it's maintaining the same angle at all times. Okay, probably there was a limit of 11,000 or above. I don't know why it does that, but it's planning some kind of path, and now it's leveling off, maybe? I guess it wants to level off in some kind of special altitude, so it has its own calculation. This add-on is not perfect. Let's see if VNAV Direct works. No, it does not. Okay. Sophie had another speed restriction of 220 just for sport. I'm going to put it in. And you can see it's a little bit erroneous. The airplane is not that erroneous. It usually knows what it's doing. Like right now it's descending below the glide path, or the descent path. And I don't really know why, because it's saying it's maintaining path, but it's really not. It's maintaining below the path. So that's something. 10,000 feet, we're about to cross it, and we're already below 10,000, so we're looking fine on that front. About 37 miles to go until we are at the runway. So I'm just waiting for that opportunity to show you the preview function, which is really essential. It's how we do ILS approaches. At some point during the arrival, which we typically do the arrival on LNAV in vertical path, or an LNAV in VNAV, and at which points, we would be just like that. We're now in magenta, but we want to at some point be able to show the approach itself. Okay, coming down here, the next is Sophie at, Goshi at 6,000. Alright, let's see, we're kind of getting closer to the 30 mile away from the airport. Let's see how it does. Now, we have also the airplane also has a function to manage the approach speeds and to just kind of slow down as we're getting closer and closer to the approach. Yeah, we can see. So we have clean speed of 200, distance to destination at 15, first approach waypoint, yes or no. We could just say no, so just the only criteria to go back to 200 is 15 miles away to 200 when it's clean. I did not put any landing speed, so let's do that right now really quickly. That's what happens when you ignore normal procedures. And then I'm going to show you something else really quickly. I'm going to use 130, 135, the AC, the approach climb. So basically the initial climb on a missed approach, 155, and VFS of 188. Okay, we went into terminal mode. Okay, so theoretically should have auto-tuned the approach. So let's see what happens when we hit preview. Not really. Okay, that's a shame. So I'm just going to go, let's see, it is IBOS on both sides. 110.3, that's correct. It's a little wonky, but 110.3. Oh, I guess the second one did go. Let's see if the first one. There we go. IBOS on both sides. I guess it was just a little bit late in terminal mode. 110.3, and we can just hit preview, and we can see the course 035, and it's just showing us to the station. Goshi, the speed is a little bit high, so we see it's trying to maintain the path and speed on thrust, so we just simply on this descent, idle is simply not enough to maintain it. Now we're a little bit of a conundrum because we are slowing down on descent, but we cannot really use flaps yet because our max speed limit for flaps 1 is 230. So here comes the auto brakes. The speed brakes, excuse me. And we can see that we're above the path. Now we're intercepting the VNAV path. and we're below the glide slope, which is pretty fine, to be honest. This is a good time to start slowing down, so I'm going to go to manual speeds and go initially to 200. And once again, speed brakes. It can be quite effective. It's pretty nice. And as we can see, we're maintaining with all of the altitude restrictions on the approach. Winnie more than 4,000, Nabo more than 3,000, and then Milt at 1,700. Below 230 knots, we're 15 miles away from the airport. That's a good time for flaps 1. And we want to do that before we hit green dot. So green dot plus 10 is a good time to do that. And that's roughly it. So let's do flaps 1. One thing to note is that only with flaps 1 or up we can use the speed brakes. Okay, the green dot has dropped because the flaps has descended, so I'm going to set the speed bug to green dot plus 1. Once we are flaps 2 or more, the speed brakes, regardless of your lever position, the speed brakes will stow, and if you're still trying to use the speed brakes, you'd get an ICAS message. Okay, green dot plus 10, let's do, and we're below 230 knots, so let's do flaps 2. And we can go to speed 170, which is a very common speed for this stage of the approach. Number at above 3000, still a little bit below the path, but we'll accept it just because I'm trying to show you what it can do on its own, not necessarily what happens if I intervene. Now, Milt is the final approach fix. So we passed Nabu, there's no more restrictions other than actually maintaining the final approach fix altitude. So in this case, I can hit approach mode, and right away we went into loc and glide slope as well, which is kind of nice. So let's do flaps 3. Now we'll wait a little bit with flaps 3. We're doing well. Okay, auto throttle, chillax a little bit. But as we can see, now we're in approach 1 only. The amber here is because probably the first officer is trying to be on radio. No, it's not. Okay. That's wrong. Auto land would not be a thing over here. And we're just nicely getting to the runway, 1,700. Since we intercepted the glide slope, at this point we can set the missed approach altitude, which is 3,000 feet, which is set. You can see it's not exactly accurate, like George is letting the airplane go a little bit away from the localizer, but it's okay. We can do flaps 3 now. We're below 200, so flaps 3. And we can slow down to green dot plus 10. 160 works for me. Gear down. After gear is down and 3 green, then we can set flaps 5, which would be our final flaps for today. There we go. Down, 3 green. Flaps 5. Speed V approach. And we would do the landing checklist. So coming down nicely. Not much to say about that really. Just an airplane flying an ILS. And this pretty much concludes it. I'm not going to talk about the go-around or anything that... Ooh, George, come on. Come on. Yeah, the real airplane doesn't do so bad with speed protection or speed maintaining. Of course, if it would, I would have to help it myself and protect it. But this is pretty much the basics of what we can do with the autopilot. As you can see, it's very wonky in the field there and the prepare 3D. But nevertheless, the function of what I wanted to show you is there. Hope you've enjoyed that, and I have no intention of trying to land this thing on camera. It's kind of a nightmare to hand fly, to be honest. just my experience with it. You can actually see all of the pitch trim changes and the throttle changes. So anyway, that concludes it. I'm not going to talk about Outland today. I hope it was helpful. If you have anything to comment or say or whatever, I'm very happy to hear. Otherwise, happy flying.